How fast can an NFL quarterback lose his job? Not over a season, not over a month. Sometimes it happens in a single afternoon, the kind that doesn't feel loud at first but quietly rewrites everything. That's exactly what Cleveland just lived through. Going into preseason, the Browns told everyone the same safe story. Open competition, patience, let it play out. But behind the scenes, the mood was already different. Phones were being checked, scenarios were being discussed, and contingency plans were closer than anyone wanted to admit. Then the game happened. What was supposed to be a routine preseason start suddenly felt like a stress test for the entire quarterback room. One player stepped onto the field like he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. Calm, confident, in control. The other, watching momentum swing in real time, knowing how unforgiving this league can be when timing turns against you. This wasn't about hype. It wasn't about social media clips. And it definitely wasn't just about stats. It was about how quickly belief shifted in the stadium, in the locker room, and inside the front office. Because when belief changes, everything follows. What made this situation explode wasn't just how well one quarterback played. It was how fast the conversation changed afterward. Trade whispers that once felt theoretical suddenly felt urgent. The idea of a competition started sounding more like PR than reality. And Cleveland, a franchise burned by years of quarterback chaos, felt something dangerous again. Hoping. And once that shows up, there's no going back. Because what happened next wasn't supposed to happen this fast, but in the NFL, momentum never asks for permission. What makes this situation even more fascinating is that the chaos didn't start with the game. It started before a single snap was taken. Quietly, and without much public attention, reports began circulating that the Browns had already received trade interest for Dillon Gabriel before preseason action even kicked off. That detail matters more than people realized at the time, because teams don't field trade calls unless there's at least some internal uncertainty. Front offices don't casually entertain offers for quarterbacks they view as part of the long-term plan. That tells us something important. Cleveland wasn't reacting, they were preparing. Publicly, the messaging stayed clean. Competition, depth, development. But privately, the Browns were clearly evaluating outcomes. If Gabriel impressed, great. If not, they had options lined up. That's how modern NFL decision-making works. You don't wait for the storm to hit before you board up the windows. And here's the part that got overlooked. The interest wasn't random. Multiple teams reportedly viewed Gabriel as a viable short-term solution or long-term backup, someone who could stabilize a room or bridge a season. That kind of interest doesn't come out of thin air. It suggests Cleveland already knew where his ceiling might land in their own system. Meanwhile, Shedeur Sanders existed in a different lane entirely. While Gabriel was being discussed in terms of trade value and roster flexibility, Shedeur was being evaluated through a different lens. Development, upside, command. The kind of traits you don't quantify easily but feel instantly when a quarterback takes control of a huddle. That contrast created tension long before kickoff. The Browns were effectively straddling two timelines at once, one focused on short-term insurance, the other on long-term direction. And that's a dangerous place to live as a quarterback room, because once one timeline accelerates, the other collapses. That's why the preseason start mattered so much. It wasn't just another audition. It was a referendum on which plan would survive. The moment Shedeur took the field, that internal debate didn't need another meeting. It didn't need film breakdowns or long discussions. The answer started revealing itself live under pressure, with thousands watching. And that's when the trade whispers stopped feeling speculative and started feeling inevitable. Because once a front office sees the future clearly, the present becomes negotiable. And the next section, that's when everything accelerated fast. The moment Shedeur Sanders stepped onto the field, Something felt different, and it had nothing to do with the scoreboard. This wasn't reckless energy. It wasn't nerves masked as confidence. It was control. The kind that shows up when a quarterback understands not just the play, but the moment. From the first few snaps, Shedeur moved like someone who already belonged there. Calm in the pocket, eyes up, feet steady. No panic when pressure crept in. And that matters because preseason football exposes quarterbacks in uncomfortable ways. Vanilla playbooks, backup linemen, mixed units that fall apart without warning. That environment eats inexperienced players alive. Yet Shedeur navigated it like he'd rehearsed this exact chaos. The Panthers' defense didn't just get beaten, they got confused. Coverages broke down. Angles disappeared. And each completed pass chipped away at the idea that this was still a wide-open competition. You could feel it in the crowd. That low buzz that grows into something louder when people realize they're watching a shift, not just a drive. This wasn't about gaudy numbers or highlight chasing. It was about sequencing, third down decisions, pocket movement that created throwing lanes where none should exist. He played bigger than his measurements and faster than the moment demanded. Meanwhile, everything changed on the sideline. Because when one quarterback looks this comfortable, the comparison becomes unavoidable. Suddenly, every earlier rep from camp gets reevaluated. Every "he looked fine" turns into "was that actually enough?" That's the danger of a breakout moment. It doesn't just elevate one player, it shrinks the margin for everyone else. The Browns didn't need to announce anything. They didn't need to make a statement. Body language did the talking. Coaches leaned in. Teammates responded differently. Defensive players started chirping with more confidence, knowing the offense could sustain drives instead of surviving them. That's the part fans don't always see. Quarterbacks don't just run offenses. They change how entire teams behave. By the time the afternoon was over, this stopped being about upside or potential. It became about reality. The depth chart didn't officially change, but everyone in the building knew it had already shifted. And that's when the pressure truly hit. Because when one quarterback seizes the moment under the lights, the other doesn't just lose reps, he loses time. And in the NFL, time is the one thing no player ever gets back. What happened next wasn't gradual, it was immediate. This is the part of the story most people underestimate. In the NFL, jobs don't usually fade away slowly. They vanish the moment momentum turns against you. For Dillon Gabriel, that shift wasn't loud or dramatic. There was no public benching, no coach calling an emergency meeting. It was quieter than that and far more dangerous. Because the moment Shedeur Sanders looked comfortable under real pressure, Gabriel's margin for error didn't shrink, it evaporated. That's how this league works. All offseason, Gabriel did what quarterbacks are supposed to do. He showed up early, took reps seriously, said the right things, won drills, but effort doesn't protect you once the lights come on. When games start, the NFL doesn't care who worked hardest in July. It cares who controls the moment in August. And that's where the contrast became unavoidable. While Shedeur looked like the offense was an extension of him, Gabriel suddenly felt like a variable. Not bad, not unplayable, just uncertain. And uncertainty is the fastest way to lose trust in a league built on ruthless clarity. What made it worse was timing. This didn't happen late in the season when teams are already locked in. It happened early, when front offices still have flexibility, when phones still ring, when roster math hasn't hardened. That's the danger zone for any quarterback who doesn't seize the moment. Once a rookie shows he can handle real speed, real pressure, and real expectations, the organization starts asking uncomfortable questions. Not who's better today, but who gives us the most control tomorrow? That question doesn't favor placeholders. Gabriel didn't suddenly become worse at football. He simply got passed by someone who made good enough feel obsolete. And in a league where every team is searching for upside, that's a brutal place to stand. You could see it in the way conversations changed. The language softened. Praise turned generic. Confidence turned conditional. Those are red flags players feel long before fans notice. Because once a front office stops talking about what you are and starts talking about what you could be for someone else, the writing is already on the wall. And that's when Cleveland's situation stopped being about competition. It became about timing, leverage, and asset management. Which brings us to the next phase, when interest turns into intent and trade calls stop being hypothetical. That's when things get real. There's a moment in every NFL quarterback situation when the language quietly changes. It goes from "we're evaluating" to "we're listening." And when that shift happens, it's never accidental. That's exactly where Cleveland landed. Once Shedeur Sanders showed he could command the offense under live pressure, the Browns didn't need another preseason week to understand the direction this was heading. The internal question stopped being about development and started being about leverage. Because in the NFL, value doesn't wait around. You either act while it exists, or you watch it disappear. That's why the trade buzz around Dillon Gabriel suddenly felt louder, sharper, and more urgent. Front offices across the league know how this works. A quarterback with experience, reps, and perceived upside still has currency, but only before he's clearly labeled expendable. The moment a team unofficially crowns a new QB1, the clock starts ticking on everyone else in the room. Cleveland understands that better than most. They've lived through quarterback purgatory. They've watched assets lose value while decisions dragged on. And this time, they aren't pretending patience is a virtue. If there's a team out there looking for a stabilizer, a bridge, or a developmental option, the Browns know now is when the phone has to be answered. And that doesn't mean Gabriel failed. It means the league moves faster than loyalty. What's telling is how carefully Cleveland has handled the public messaging. No declarations, no confirmations, just calm language and neutral expressions. That's not uncertainty, that's discipline. Because the moment you admit you're shopping a quarterback, leverage evaporates. The Browns aren't emotional about this. They're methodical. And that's what makes this different from a typical preseason storyline. This isn't fans overreacting to highlights. This is a franchise aligning timelines. One quarterback represents momentum, belief, and future investment. The other represents optionality, something that can be converted into picks, flexibility, or insurance elsewhere. NFL teams don't hold on to optionality when clarity appears. The most brutal part: these decisions are often made before the player involved even hears about them. By the time rumors hit social media, front offices are already 3 conversations ahead. That's why this situation feels inevitable instead of chaotic. Cleveland isn't choosing sides emotionally. They're choosing direction. And once that direction becomes obvious internally, everything else becomes transactional. Which brings us to the most irreversible part of this story. The moment the fanbase and locker room started moving in the same direction. Because once belief spreads beyond the front office, there's no resetting the narrative. There's one force in the NFL that front offices pretend doesn't matter until it suddenly matters more than anything else: the fanbase. You can manage contracts. You can spin press conferences. You can slow play decisions. But once the crowd emotionally commits to a quarterback, there's no undo button. And in Cleveland, that switch flipped fast. It wasn't just the stat line or the clean throws. It was the feeling. The energy in the stadium shifted the moment Shedeur Sanders took command of the huddle. You could sense it in the way fans leaned forward instead of checking their phones. In the way every snap felt like it might turn into something special. Browns fans didn't just watch him, they recognized him. That's dangerous territory for anyone else on the depth chart. Cleveland fans have been through too much to fall in love easily. They've heard every promise, seen every next guy, learned the hard way not to celebrate early. So when this fan base starts buying in, it's not hype, it's survival instinct. They're desperate for stability, competence, and belief. And Shedeur gave them all three in one afternoon. Social media told the story before the press conferences ever could. Highlights spread faster than analysis. Clips looped. Slow-motion replays popped up everywhere. Fan edits started circulating like this was already his team. When that happens, the quarterback conversation stops being about evaluation and starts being about identity. Fans weren't asking if Shedeur should play. They were asking how long it would take before everyone else caught up. That's when things become irreversible. Because once the fan base chooses, every other option feels like resistance instead of patience. Every snap taken by someone else feels like a delay. Every mistake gets magnified. Every comparison becomes unfair, not because it's inaccurate, but because the emotional verdict is already in. And the locker room feels that too. Players notice which throws get the loudest reaction. They notice who the crowd believes in on third down. They notice which quarterback energizes the sideline instead of quieting it. Confidence is contagious, but so is belief. And once belief spreads through a building, it changes how people move, talk, and prepare. This is the part teams can't script. You can draft a quarterback, you can develop one, but you can't manufacture the moment when a fan base collectively says, "That's our guy." Cleveland didn't plan for that moment, it arrived anyway. And once it does, going backward isn't just unpopular, it's impossible. Because now, this isn't just a quarterback competition anymore. It's a transfer of trust. And trust, once given, never comes back quietly. What teams say publicly and what players feel privately are rarely the same thing. Coaches love the word competition because it buys time and keeps leverage intact. But inside the locker room, that language only works until reality shows up on the field. And reality has already spoken. Inside the Cleveland Browns building, this doesn't feel like a debate anymore. It feels like a transition. Players aren't waiting for press releases to tell them who the offense responds to. They already know. Quarterbacks don't win locker rooms with slogans. They win them with command, clarity, and confidence under pressure. That's where Shedeur Sanders separated himself. Teammates notice the small things long before fans do. How quickly a quarterback gets everyone lined up. Whether receivers trust the ball will be on time. Whether linemen believe the play call actually gives them a chance to win the rep. Those details decide who the huddle listens to, not the depth chart taped to the wall. And once that trust forms, it's obvious. Publicly, the Browns can keep saying all the right things. Privately, the reps tell the story. When a quarterback elevates energy instead of draining it, the offense practices differently. Routes get sharper. Protection gets more urgent. Defensive players talk a little more trash because they finally believe points are coming. That's not hype, that's chemistry. This is where the competition narrative quietly breaks down. Because for Dillon Gabriel, the challenge isn't effort or preparation. It's timing. He didn't lose the locker room by playing poorly. He lost it by standing next to someone who made the offense feel alive. In the NFL, that contrast is unforgiving. Solid play doesn't survive when belief shows up. Veteran players are especially sensitive to this. They've lived through false starts and half measures. They know when a team is treading water versus moving forward. And once they sense momentum, they lean into it, consciously or not. That's why the open competition talk starts sounding hollow once practices stack up and games add context. Front offices understand this dynamic better than anyone. They may speak in neutral tones, but they track how players respond. Who gets voluntary extra work? Who receivers gravitate toward between drills? Who controls the room without raising his voice? Those cues matter more than any quote. So while the public hears patience, the building feels alignment. And alignment is dangerous for anyone caught on the wrong side of it. Because when a locker room decides who it believes in, the rest becomes procedural. Depth charts follow trust. Trust follows performance. And performance doesn't care about messaging. At this point, the question isn't whether competition still exists. It's how long the language can pretend it does. Front offices don't panic the way fans do, but they also don't ignore momentum. When a situation starts changing this fast, decision makers don't need headlines to tell them what's happening. They can feel it inside the building. And right now, the silence from the Cleveland Browns front office is louder than any press conference. This is the stage where patience quietly turns into urgency. NFL executives are trained to read signals early. Trade calls don't happen because of one preseason game. They happen because that game confirms conversations that were already happening behind closed doors. When reports start floating about interest, that doesn't mean panic. It means preparedness. It means someone internally has already asked, what's the value if we move now instead of later? That question matters more than fans realize. Quarterback value is fragile. It rises on optimism and collapses on delay. The moment a front office senses that a player's role is shrinking, the window tightens. Wait too long and leverage disappears. Move too fast and you risk looking reactive. The smartest teams act in that narrow space between. That's where Cleveland finds itself. Publicly, everything stays calm. Internally, the board is being updated in real time. Every practice rep, every sideline reaction, every defensive coordinator's feedback. Because the front office doesn't just evaluate quarterbacks, it evaluates trajectories. And right now, the trajectories are heading in opposite directions. This isn't about embarrassment or blame. It's about asset management. Quarterbacks aren't just players in today's NFL. They're movable pieces with shelf lives. Even a solid backup has value if another team believes he can stabilize a room or bridge a season. But belief fades quickly once the league senses a hierarchy forming. That's why trade chatter doesn't wait for official announcements. Phones light up quietly. What would it take, becomes the question. Not because Cleveland wants out, but because smart teams ask before prices drop, and smart teams answer without committing. This is where timing becomes ruthless. If Cleveland moves now, it's framed as opportunity. If they wait, it risks being framed as surrender. The league notices the difference. So do agents. So do players. Meanwhile, the coaching staff walks a careful line. They still need depth. They still need professionalism. But they also need clarity. And clarity, once it arrives, doesn't unarrive. That's the truth most fans never see. By the time a trade happens, the decision was made weeks earlier. What the public experiences as shock is usually just the final step in a process that's already finished. So when people ask whether Cleveland is considering a move, they're already late to the conversation. The real question is whether the league is ready when Cleveland finally answers the phone, because the direction has already been set. In the NFL, real competitions are messy, slow, and unresolved for weeks. This wasn't that. What happened in Cleveland wasn't a battle that needs more film, more reps, or more patience. It was a transfer of belief, and those don't require committee meetings. From the outside, it still looks polite. Depth charts stay unofficial. Coaches keep their language careful. Press conferences remain calm. But inside the building, the decision has already taken shape. This wasn't about who worked harder, who said the right things, or who deserved more time. It was about who changed the gravity of the room the moment the lights came on. That's why this moment matters. When Shedeur Sanders stepped onto the field, the Browns didn't just see production, they saw direction. The offense moved with intent. The huddle had purpose. The sideline reacted differently. Those reactions can't be coached or manufactured. They happen when a team recognizes its future standing right in front of it. And once that recognition happens, the rest becomes inevitable. This doesn't mean Dylan Gabriel failed. It means timing failed him. The league is ruthless that way. You can do everything right and still find yourself standing next to someone who shifts the entire equation. In those moments, solid becomes invisible and good gets overshadowed by belief. Cleveland knows this better than most franchises. They've chased answers for decades. They've waited on maybes. They've convinced themselves to be patient when patience only delayed the inevitable. This time feels different, not because of one preseason game, but because of how fast certainty arrived. That speed is the giveaway. If this were truly an open competition, the conversation would still feel unresolved. Instead, it already sounds like planning. Planning for roles, planning for assets, planning for the next move. That's not how teams talk when they're undecided. That's how they talk when they're aligning. And alignment is dangerous in a good way. Because alignment means the building is moving in one direction. Players feel it, coaches feel it, front offices feel it. And once everyone starts pulling the same rope, there's no reason to pretend otherwise. So no, this wasn't a competition that tilted slightly one way. It was succession unfolding in real time. One quarterback didn't just win snaps, he won trust, he won momentum, he won the room. And in this league, that's the only victory that actually matters. Everything else, the trade rumors, the press statements, the official announcements, is just paperwork catching up to a decision that's already been made.